Well, here
All
we
right, all
are.
right.
Sorry about any delay. Those folks that are waiting had a few technical difficulties, but here we are now. Welcome back to All Things Recon, where
And
we
Josh,
discuss.
is this our first one of the year? No, we did one in No, or did we? Yeah, we did one in January. This is our second of the year, right?
Yeah, second of the year.
Awesome, awesome.
We discussed the Recon manager last time.
Okay.
Kind of went into detail about their job role, their expectations, how they contribute to the process. And today we're going to do the same thing with the used car manager. Talk about
Right.
how they help Recon improve, how they motivate their people, how they stay on top of their cars, and all that and more.
Yeah, and the used car manager. I'm kind of glad we're covering this, and it just coincidentally, I was invited to do a presentation in front of like 26 used car managers earlier this week. I flew up to Charlotte. It was the Fred Anderson group. Awesome group, great culture. And got the opportunity to speak. They had a used car summit, and I'll tell you, used cars, is just as much of a focus as now that it's as it's ever been. Um, so it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And when we cover the topic of the used car manager, I feel like if there's anybody in the dealership whose pay plan benefits the most from doing recon well, right? It's that used car manager. So, we like to talk about some things that, how they can influence the culture and, the role they play, and especially when it comes to leveraging a recon tool to make sure that your process, stays clean and fast.
Yeah, if I could put it in a word, I think the theme of this one is just to be involved.
Yeah.
Don't think that you're just handing off the vehicle to service and then there's nothing else. You're not involved in that process any further. You're ultimately, as the used car manager, you're responsible for that inventory and how profitable it's going to be, how much you're going to make. And so every day that those units just sit around is less money that you're going to be able to make when those deals come together. So, of course, it really behooves the used car manager to be on top of that process, not directly responsible for it, but staying involved, answering questions, doing approvals quickly, starting on day one or day zero, as we've said before. And I'm sure I don't want to steal any of your thunder there, Bobby, but
No, man, or they can be directly responsible for it, right? And it's one of those dynamics in the dealership to where it is so, if you really take a step back and look at what is going on when it comes to just a used car process, right? The dealership itself is taxed with the responsibility of getting cars reconditioned and frontline ready. All the cars they take in, not only by law do they have to safety inspect them and make sure they are fit to be sold to the public, but you also want your cars to stand tall. You should never have to apologize for your cars. You don't want to be synonymous for selling crappy cars, right? So there's a lot involved, and one of the things that I asked an interesting question in this seminar, the summit that we are having. To say, hey, I asked all the used car directors that were in the room, raise your hand if you would rate on a scale of 1 to 10 your relationship with the service department 5 or better, right? And Josh, we go into these dealerships, and you can see, and sometimes we sense the contention between used car department and service. There's always that, and I would say maybe a third to a half of the guys raise their hands, right? And I told them, I said, y'all need to go out and have beers with your service departments, right? That is a huge opportunity in dealerships. Is you have what the used car department and the number one customer for the service department, right? Nobody spends more money on service than the used car department. And the used car director, the used car manager, is the representative. He's responsible for the performance of that department, right? And so, we spoke a little bit about the culture in that summit, and just things they can do to try and get everybody on the same page. Because I think you could, it's truly a collision of pay plans, right? The used car manager, they try, they you spend all this science, all these software programs. We had representatives there from Mannheim, and there's just so many tools that helps them buy the cars right. You know,
right.
what can we get this car for? And buy it at auction. Of course, they'd like to get most of their vehicles on trade, right? Take those in on trade because that's a selling opportunity. And then, you know, um, but buying them right has been especially difficult. But then, trying to get them through the shop and for a reasonable amount of money, or to spend as least amount as possible. They want as much profit to sell the car. Where on the service side, they want to turn as many hours as possible on these cars. So somewhere we got to reconcile the collision of pay plans when it comes to the relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that can help any and all of our dealers with that is probably just creating a recon team, having a recon manager, making that a chief responsibility, kind of crystallizing that as something that is central to the entire dealership's operations,
Hmm.
rather than, just a sort of side gig for key people in the organization. It really should be a focus, of course, of one individual. Now, of course, we already talked, a lot about the recon manager and the benefits of having an individual in that role. Um, but now we're talking here about the used car manager. What are a few things you think, Bobby, that a used car manager should do every day in order to facilitate their reconditioning process?
Be kind of make it known that or just stay positive first of all, right? Because um on a day to day, well, let's say for example, how many of your people downstream, the people in the back of the shop or your technicians, um, understand velocity and turn, you know, on a daily basis, maybe express things as a we need situation, not like you're because sometimes to technicians, you're the impatient car manager. You're all impatient. It's the car business, and you always want your cars yesterday, right? But do your people know why that is of high interest, not only for the used car manager, but for the dealership? So, just maybe have some stand up meetings, have some positive interactions with your service side. Um, just make sure that we influence the thinking. I've said this a million times. Influence the thinking instead of just demanding the results from the service side. When your people know the why, it takes it off of you that you're just not that impatient jerk that runs around the dealership, guns ablazing, looking for your cars. And day to day, Josh, you've heard me say this a billion times. Approve work in a timely fashion. I think that is the most controllable, best thing you can do for your recon process, right? I say that dealer, service side people are, they start cheering and doing jumping jacks because, oh yeah, God, that's because it's often a problem, right? It's so often it's a challenge to try and get these, you have a tool, that you can do it within minutes. So, I think approving work fast, communicating, making your rounds, you should know the people that make recon happen. Go shake their hand, go figure out how many kids they got at home, if they're married, whatever, what's going on. Take them out for beers. That relationship is super important.
100%. Yeah, and I think that is probably the one of the first things that, if you and I were to arrive at a store where that sort of trouble is taking place, one of the first things we would do is address that, try to repair that relationship to some extent by bringing those people together into a room and talking about the process frankly and openly in a team way. And I think you made a good point, Bobby, earlier. When you're communicating, if you're the used car manager, if you have rapid recon, if you have velocity, if you have any program that's helping you kind of keep track of productivity, it's a team effort, and always try to approach these situations from the perspective of how can I help you achieve the results that we're both looking for. And one of the ways you do that is, like Bobby explained, is you bring your people in on the why. Why is it that you need the vehicles in the time that you need them? How much money is there in getting recon done well? And it's very easy to demonstrate this, and I think we have in previous sessions as well. Um, but the point being that when you bring your people into that reasoning, you treat them like professionals, and you treat them like peers. You treat them like team members rather than those that are going to just take orders, and that helps gel. Really does help gel the process along. And I've seen it. I've seen the difference in a group of people who have a culture of professionalism, where they uphold their own integrity and they're responsible for their part of the process. versus a culture where it's coming from the top down and everything's about the expectations of leaders versus what the team can achieve together. And so when you're communicating in our platform, when you have access to look at which cars are lingering, where does it look like bottlenecks are happening in the process, the goal is to get the cars to the front line. We can address the process when we have a meeting at the end of the month to look at the reporting. The goal is to get the cars that we currently have to the front line as fast as possible. So when we're communicating, the goal is what can we do together to get these cars through the process. So go ahead. I don't. Oh yeah.
No, I was going to jump in, Josh, because you can't just wait till the end of the month. Let's have 10-minute stand-up meetings every day or every couple of days, right? Because if you're waiting to the end of the month to address something, it's 4 weeks too late, and you got a 4-week problem instead of what could be a 2-day or 4-hour problem, right?
Well, what I'm saying is, Bobby, I'm talking about like, in when something comes up in process related to an individual unit, let's say we're waiting on something, a part's going to be back ordered. We don't halt the process because of that. We got to keep the cars moving forward. I'm
Yeah.
talking about, if you're a leader and you're looking at your workflow right now, you see cars in red or you see process bottlenecks. The way you address that is you look at each individual unit, you figure out the context for what's going on, you figure out what you can do right now. And then later on, when you have that stand-up meeting, whatever time or whatever interval you do it at, that's when you look back at the reporting and you say, how did this happen? How did these cars get delayed? Was there a miscommunication? Did someone not have all the resources that they needed at their disposal? Were they sidetracked with some other task? You can find those answers when you look at the reporting, provided that people are utilizing the tool correctly, they're documenting things, they're moving cars the way they need to. But the goal for managers on the day-to-day is to get the cars to the front line and to help the team achieve that however they can. And communication is one of the best ways to do that, especially, and this is what I would recommend, Bobby, that a great used car manager should do every day, is an intake process, some kind of, trade walk, some kind of intake process. Every day they take, inventory of the units that are coming in fresh to the inventory, and they have a standard process. They have
Let's call it the endangered trade walk, right? It's almost an endangered species,
right. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. I forgot about that. The trade walk just so hugely important if you really want to cut down on what needs to happen communication wise later, right? You already established it needs tires. Involve your sales team on the trade walk, right? And in fact, I've experienced that real life. Have your internal advisor. You should all have one. Have if your technicians aren't super busy right now, you have some of your vendors join the trade walk and your salespeople, right? What do they tell you? Well, you may not know this, but they always top of the head awareness of your inventory. They always tell salespeople, you go to the desk saying, "Hey, do we have this and this?" And they're gonna smack you. You need to know your inventory. But what better way to know what you got coming in is to attend the trade walks in the morning. You already know what service, what they've discussed. Does it need, do we need to paint the bumper? Does it need tires? Do we fix these scratches? Remove the tint, whatever, right? And you can tag or put notes in your recon tool right there and then. And that way, when these cars go through the, past mechanical, they make it through the mechanical portion. Everybody knows how to handle that car. You don't have to communicate later. Hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? Right. So yeah, the famous almost forgotten about trade walk, and I agree. That was great. You brought that up. The
Yeah.
other thing, Josh, I'm
Go ahead.
sorry. The other thing real quick is, back, Josh, when we used to install, when we were doing a bunch of, on-site installs for these dealerships, when you'd have those kickoff meetings, what do? We invite the GM, we invite the used car manager, the internal advisor, if applicable, some parts personnel, maybe internal technicians, right? And sometimes I feel that, we have these kickoff meetings, they probably may or may not have. When's the last time they had? Yeah, for the first time, you got those people in the same room. And to your point, Josh, yeah, have these little communication meetings. Well, just getting those people in the same room talking about it will kind of start to gel your culture a little bit. And it's like, oh, it's important. They got the GM showed up to this meeting. Well, damn right, it's important because, remember my velocity and turn tool. Okay. In a moderately busy dealership, that could be close to $1 million a year. And just by reducing your age of inventory, by cutting your recon in half. right? And so, holy crap, yes, there's enough money in doing recon well for it to be important enough to have a meeting and to build a culture around it.
100%. And if you have the tool, why not have the meeting? If you're capturing the data,
Oh,
if your people are utilizing the tool and they're moving cars in and out of steps, this is where I get a little frustrated sometimes with our dealers, because we'll have, leadership on the sales side who just are not interested in what their service department is really doing. And yet the service department is maintaining the tool. Everything is where it's supposed to be. Everything is organized. The inventory is where it needs to be. Maybe there's a few delays here and there with things that the service department can't see, like the detail,
mhm,
but everything is running with the tool. It's just leaders aren't looking. And if leaders look, they would see where the bottlenecks are. They would see where these delays are happening. And they'd be able to help that process along as well. They'd also see that their approval times are probably abysmal.
mhm.
But the point being that if you already have these tools in place, which a lot of the people on this meeting do, then why not have the meeting? Why not have that moment in time where everyone can sit and acknowledge what's going on with the units in process. Sorry for any barking dogs in the background. But the idea being that for some conversations I have, the service department and everyone who is has the granular day-to-day task with the tool is doing their job, but that information never makes it all out to the sales department. And why that sucks so bad, guys, is first of all, like we said already, the used car manager is the person who benefits the most from the software. They're the ones who stand to gain the most from doing recon well. We've said that before. It's because it's just true. And
Mhm,
then another reason that that's so bad is because the the sales department in general should have access to information with regards to what's going on with the cars in recon, so they can answer questions for their customers. They can figure out if a unit is available to be seen or not, and what's been done to it. And there's a whole science to getting the narrative, the story of what happens to the cars in your dealership down and documented, so that you can relate that to customers as part of your selling strategy. So if you're not engaging with the software, if you're not engaging with the team, then you're just leaving so much stuff on the table. You're leaving that narrative. You're leaving your cars standing tall because you can't represent your process well. You're leaving all the money that you're losing every day that the cars are not ready on the front line. You're losing a lot. So I would say to a lot of our dealers, I'm sure that those people who are a part of this webinar are not really included, but maybe there are some who need to hear this. If you have the tool, you ought to be following up and also doing all the other things, like working on the tool and having a meeting. Have a quick stand-up meeting with all the people involved in recon. It will 100% improve things. I guarantee you.
mhm.
If you
Yeah,
weren't having a meeting before.
yeah, you got the transparency tool. Let it be known that everybody's looking at it, right? And that could be a very concise, very efficient meeting. It could be a 10-minute meeting,
Very
daily
fast.
or a couple times throughout the week, because you got a tool to measure what's going on. And you can just, let's talk about our bottlenecks. Let's talk about those few units. Good news is we're talking about it after day number 2 instead of week number 2, right?
Yeah, and as you have that conversation, you become aware of what your process is and how it
Mhm.
functions, where the weaknesses are, where your bottlenecks might emerge when you have to rely on one or two personnel to get cars through what they're going to get or part of the process where they're going to get bottlenecked.
Yeah.
Once you're aware of that, you can plan for it. So if a problem car is coming down the line, you can move things around a little bit to hopefully bring down the average across all the cars without having that outlier unit blow things up. You just have to you can stay on top of your process a lot better when you have that regular flow of communication between everyone involved. And that just
Yeah.
means what I would say, Bobby recommends daily. I don't think that's necessarily achievable. I would go weekly or bi-weekly, every 1 or 2 days out of the week. But
Right.
daily is fine. However, more frequently is better,
Well,
right?
it could be 2 people, okay? And another thing I asked the big group, okay? Let's see, and we're finding less and less, Josh, I think you'd agree. The most important thing, number one rule, have a dedicated team. It needs to be somebody's full-time job to pay attention to recon, right? And occasionally I know we talk to dealerships where they're kind of sending cars to the main population of technicians. The service managers giving the used cars to one of 4 advisors that are sliding it in between customer pay, right? And I feel less and less now. Back in the day, you go in a dealership and not a lot of dedicated teams, but I think a lot of the industry has caught on a little bit, and more dealerships nowadays are setting up the internal teams, right? Whether if you do 150 cars a month, let's do 3, maybe 4 dedicated technicians. They do not do customer pay. They do nothing but use cars. This group that I was in their summit, they all seem to have the dedicated technicians, the used car technicians in the shop. One thing they were missing is probably, in my opinion, probably the most important piece. And what do you think it was? I'll let you guess.
The
Which
recon
person?
manager, the internal writer.
The internal writer, right? And the director of the group says, yeah, we got internal techs, but we maybe not the internal writer. I told this group of 30 used car directors, if I really want to know what's going on with your recon, I can walk right through the front door of your dealership and I go right to that internal advisor. He knows more about your process than maybe you do, especially when it relates to service, right?
Yeah, and
So.
sometimes even out of service because they have to follow up on other tasks, like
Mhm.
when the car comes out of the shop.
Right. So that stand-up meeting could just be you and your internal advisor. Hey, let's talk about the bottlenecks, right? Guess, maybe incentivize that internal guy, build the relationship. I always tell 3 golden rules, and I've said this, a couple times. So have a dedicated team. Great. Now you got to rule number 2, have a tool to measure it, right? And rule number 3, build a culture around it. And you cannot do number 3 unless you have number 1 and number 2. And though if you can, use car directors, if you can pioneer that in your dealership, go talk to your service manager. He should love you. You give him a lot of money every month. And here's a little bit of the thinking too. The service department, they get to close an RO, the money gets charged to the unit, and they get their money right away. They get to realize those dollars. The used car manager, he gets to go increase the cost of his car that might sit there for 60 to 90 days, right? The dealership doesn't see that money until you sell the car. So, you can tell there could be a little bit of, I don't want to, if you want to call it disparity, but just a little bit of, you know, uh, tough, maybe
Imbalance.
some components that could create friction with that. You got to be on the same team, right? So go extend the olive branch to your service department. He should give you a big hug every day, right? Because you bring him so many internal dollars, and over the course of the month. That needs to be a strong relationship, right? Another thing too, what if you incentivized your service people or your important people in the process with a component of used car gross? So Josh, you're the internal writer. We're going to give you have an opportunity to, I'm just throwing numbers out there. You have an opportunity to make $500 a month, little pay plan perk, right? If you keep your recon under 5 days, your controllable part, keep it under 5 days, or maybe, hey, if you can keep this section of the workflow, maybe you should keep that less than 3 days because you got about a day for detail, a day for, right? So, or whatever you do, and then, part of that pay plan perk could be a small percentage of used car gross. So now, Josh, you have it in your head that, hey, if I can get this used car, if I can help the used car department make more money on the cars, we don't want to skip stuff. We want to be thorough, right? Um, I can help, I can partake in that and, keep it cheap if we can, right? Instead of trying to work your base pay plan. You know what I mean? So I think it's interesting. That's an interesting concept to actually, it could be, just a small percentage of used car gross can be used to incentivize the used car or, the used car team on the service side.
Yeah, and that could address the discrepancy sometimes we'll see where we have a good average overall, but we're not focusing hard enough on the cars themselves, on the individual units and their actual age in the inventory.
Hmm.
We're just we're focused on the recon number and the averages there, but we have units that are very old that are kind of lingering in these like non-counting steps. Stuff like that'll happen.
A lot of
And
pass-through steps and communication steps, right? And the car is really downstream. The car could be out in detail, but you got a complete, maybe service complete step that was at your cue to close the RO. Nobody cares about the RO closed other than you and the service manager. As far as the car getting front line, and yeah, you want to close the RO, but what I'm saying is, that should not hold up the process. There's a lot of pass-through steps that sometimes, we see bottlenecks in, and it's frustrating. But
yeah, we need to attack those cars that are old. the ones that are aging out of the inventory, we need to address those first. So the
Yep.
priority units, if you have some component of a pay plan attached to used car gross, that can address that, because now you have the recon manager has an incentive not just to attack the average days in recon, but actually to go after every aging unit, and not
Mhm.
just looking at, the average times in and out of steps, but looking day to day at the aging units in the process, which is typically something that the used car manager is going to be kind of biting their nails about, whereas people in service are more interested in keeping the averages across the time low. You'd think
Yep.
it's the same thing. It is the same thing,
Mm.
but the way you go about it is a little bit different. And
Yep.
this is one thing we don't really touch on, Bobby. But if you're really doing recon well, you're micromanaging the hell out of that process, because every car is unique. It has its own unique needs, and it's going to need some kind of a decision to be made, and they're going to be in different states. So if you really want to be efficient with recon, you have to address each car's needs. Now, for the most part, if you build a good, robust, strong process that's standardized, where you have, this car, this car, this car, then you can kind of sit back and let things roll. But you still have to address things. You still have to be on top of it. Make sure if there's a problem car coming down the line, needs some kind of special arrangement, we make the arrangement.
Agreed.
But
100%.
that's when you get really granular into it. I think for the most part with this podcast, we're really talking, and I hope this is reaching the ears of dealers that, are, thinking about how to structure recon in general, and trying to improve where they're already at.
Mm.
Um, we might, those more granular conversations we have usually one-on-one.
Yeah. But as a used car director, pioneer some culture. Just go for it. Go, talk with your service directors, see what you guys can do to just, meet in the middle with the mentality. One of the guys in this used car summit, God, they were joking about the clean, the brake clean and adjust, which is a very common. Every car needs a brake clean and adjust. They're like, I don't even know what the hell that is. All I know is it cost me $125 a car. What the hell is a clean and adjust, right? It's the rear drums where you can kind of, lube the working parts and clean them up and adjust the brakes so that the clearance between the shoes on the old drum brakes and the drums is, your brakes are a little more responsive. Whatever, right? So, cars nowadays, few and far between actually have rear drum brakes, right? So service department, I mean, used car directors are typically, they're skeptical, and it's tough to trust the service department sometimes, right? So pioneer the relationship. Go have some meetings with those guys and say, hey, what can we do to get everybody on the same page? And it could just have a conversation about it. And then, oh, we know the why. And here we are. And oh, I'll help, this is great. And before you know it, they got to know how it benefits them too, not just the used car department, but you get the cars out there sooner, you sell them faster, and then you got to replace those cars. And now before you know it, you got an extra turn or two a year, which in some cases could be 100, 200 cars a year coming through the shop. So it's trickle down economics that benefits everybody.
And if you have a dedicated team, you don't even really need to have that. Probably the one time would be good, but you don't really need to keep reiterating that, because they know more volume for me means more money. Like, it's just, if I'm the internal writer, no one needs to tell me that I want more cars going through the shop.
Yep.
I know I want more cars going through the shop.
Yep. And then if you can really trust them, hey, give them, another best practice, aside from the dedicated team, maybe give them a budget, right? Maybe if they anything $1,500 or less, just go. I don't need to approve it, right? That does not mean that every car costs them $1,500 no matter what, right? So, you could see where some used car directors are, I don't know about that. The cream puffs, the lease turn-ins that need an oil change and filters and maybe wipers, they're going to somehow find a way to charge me $1,500. No, throw them the bone. Get the car through the shop for $800 or whatever. If it doesn't need tires, it's a low mileage car, you know, and that's part of what the type of thing, and also our tool facilitates that as well, with documenting, being able to provide pictures and kind of increase or improve the credibility and the relationship between the shop and the used car department.
Yeah. And I think that just goes hand in hand with what I think we've been reiterating this point. But one thing, dude, you should be doing day to day in the role of the used car manager is communicating with the team. Not just the sales department who are putting together sales for you and desking deals, but the service department as well, and those people that are working on your cars. If you see something you don't understand it, ask a question. Use the notes fields in Rapid Recon or Velocity. Communicate. Even if you think you might know the answer or you have a suspicion, if you don't know the answer, if it's not self-evident from the tool, go ahead and ask the question anyway, because it's likely that you're not the only person who was questioning. You're likely not the only person who thought that maybe the information was a little ambiguous. And that's another thing I think. If leaders especially are looking at the tool and they're thinking to themselves, how would someone who's only a little bit familiar with my business, how would they interact with this workflow? What would they be able to figure out from just looking at my Rapid Recon or my Velocity? If the answer is not much, then that means we're not communicating enough. We should be able to figure out the story with every car by looking at the notes in Rapid Recon or Velocity. So if you see something and there's a question like, hey, we're waiting, like you see a unit in parts hold, it's in red, it's been there for 5 days, there's no notes. What are we waiting on? That's the question you would ask of the person who is responsible for the part step. The reason is not because you want to bother them, but because you want them to continuously document the process. It should not be a question for them. If a unit's in parts hold, they automatically document what the reason is why. If that's not happening, we need to incentivize our people to do that. One of the ways we can do that is by communicating with them through the tool and making that the standard. And especially, once again, leaders, this is why it's so important. If we made the commitment, hey, we're going to use this tool. This is the tool we're going to use for reconditioning efforts. And then we're still texting and we're still emailing and we're still walking across the delecdership. Stop doing that. Use the tools that are available to you.
Jump in head first. Have faith in the technology, right?
Yeah, and so you got to be the change you want to see in the world. The whole point of doing this stuff remotely is so that you can be at the golf course or at a meeting across town and pull out your phone and do the approval from there. It's just because go ahead.
Oh no, you're managing less because Josh, I think you can agree. When we roll these out in dealerships, sometimes I think a lot of people are surprised at how things just start to happen automatically. Oh, yes. Well, he's got it on his phone. When detail was done, he pushed a button that sent it to photos. Holy crap, things are moving through because people, right? It's the transfer of accountability and it's a transparency tool, and you're holding the people accountable for their part of the process. It's before you know it, things are happening automatically. So it's less whack-a-mole, less chasing cars, and just gets smooth and like a fine-tuned machine.
100%. If you're on our program, either Rapid Recon or Velocity, don't do any more communication through email or text message with regards to reconditioning. Only communicate through the program. The reason is so that everything is in one place with regards to recon. We can consolidate that information as much as possible. And there's 1,000 reasons why, but of course, it's because it's such a complex process. It's because it involves so many different departments, so many different people, and because each car is unique. All of those reasons mean it's really important for us to document, really important for us to communicate and keep open with that. So if you're looking at the program, you see some cars in red. If there's not an explanation, ask for the explanation. And we should make that a regular practice. We're always communicating. We're always documenting.
Awesome. Well, Josh, I think we're at time. We started a few minutes late, so we'll wrap up. I know it's a Friday too. Typically, we do this on Thursdays, guys. So we had some scheduling conflicts, so we did it Friday. But we're probably looking at next month on the 19th of March, which would be the third Thursday. So we appreciate those of you who attended to the All Things Recon podcast. With that said, have a great rest of your week. And Josh, any closing comments from you? We're good.
Oh, I guess
build a culture.
Yeah, build that culture. Well, we really monologued this time, Bobby, but this is an interactive webinar. For those of you that have been attending regularly, we really appreciate it. We love hearing from you. So please, if you have any comments or questions at any point during the time, please raise your hand. We'll stop talking to address you because we want to hear from dealers, especially those that are working with our tools. So With that said, thanks everybody for your time. You had something to add, Bobby?
No, I was going to say, if anybody out there wants our velocity and turn tool, where you can put in your inventory and your front end PVR, back end PVR holding costs, that I got a lot of requests after that summit I was in. Okay, from those, I brought it up, and the group, if they reduce their days by 3 days, like $10 million.
Whoa. Yeah.
Crazy. So everybody's like, oh, I want that tool. So, they want to educate their people. That's super important. So if anybody wants this velocity and turn spreadsheet, I'll be happy to share it with anybody that reaches out to us. That's
Excellent.
it.
Thanks everybody. Y'all have a great one.
Happy Friday, guys. Take care.
Happy
Have a good
Friday.
weekend.